Hello, everyone. Let me go ahead and turn on my video so you know there's a real human being here. Hope everyone's having a great morning. Okay, well, welcome and thank you for joining today's webinar on campaign setup and tracking. So obviously we'll cover both of those pieces. I'll take you through a screen share here of kind of the major components of a campaign, the things you want to look out for when you set them up, how you track them while they're in progress, and some of the key things to look out for throughout the process. So I want to start just kind of by speaking to campaigns in general. If you're not familiar with campaigns and how they work, campaigns are essentially a function in Workamajig, and let me go ahead and share my screen here. Campaigns are essentially a function in Workamajig that allow you to have more detailed reporting and tracking for multiple projects. So, with a project, you have your schedule, you have your estimate. It's one project. The way that we typically recommend that you set up a project in Workamajig is through templates. So you would templatize your common project types to basically set what the schedule arc would typically look like. So what are the major milestone tasks that we need to do? And as part of that process, you'd also add the service required to complete those tasks and the number of hours that it would take to do them. I would definitely recommend if you're interested in using campaigns and you haven't to this point, to make sure that your templates are in a good place, or at least you have some in a good place before you get started. It just makes the process for setting them up a lot easier, a lot more efficient. And I'll kind of show you what I mean by that here when we go through this. But for the whys for a campaign, it's basically a way for you to track multiple different creative outputs with the same scope of work, typically the same scope of work. And it allows you a reporting link to group all of that detail together, and also some schedule and budget considerations for multiple projects. So instead of just saying, hey, I have a client interested in a website, let's say, I sell them the website project, I open up the project, we complete it, all of that. This would be more, I have a suite of projects that we've sold to the client, and they may or may not know that. You can budget at your schedule considerations. I may do some projects first and then move on to others afterwards. I see a few raised hands here. If you have any questions, feel free to throw them into the chat. I typically will leave some blocks for questions. I try to end the session a few minutes early in case anyone has anything outstanding. But if you have anything, please feel free. Oh, we have some audio issues here. You know what? Let me change my mic. All right, sorry, one moment here. Okay, is that a little bit better? Anyone hear me now? Okay, perfect. Sorry, just had to change mics. I don't know what's going on with this headset, but sometimes it likes to drop out. So we'll just use my webcam mic for now. Let me know if you hear any more audio issues. Thank you for letting me know. Okay, perfect. So yeah, if you have questions, hopefully not related to my audio issues here, please feel free to reach out and let me know. I don't know how much we missed of what I was saying there, but there were words coming out of my mouth there for a while. Basically recapping campaigns, their usage, their use cases, and why you would use them, right? So campaign, again, just a way to track multiple different projects underneath the same scope of work. Typically, those projects should typically come from a template, right? Those templates would define, hey, this is a social project, this is a website project, this is a brand ID, whatever the project type is, you'd have those templatized. And then you'd use those templates to create a campaign. Now, you don't necessarily have to use templates to create a campaign, although I would definitely recommend that that's the process that you follow, and that's what I'm going to show you here today. So if we're looking at campaigns from a setup standpoint, there is a campaigns page here in Workamajig underneath Project Manager Campaigns. And again, campaigns in the simplest forms are just a group of projects. It's just a bunch of projects underneath the same reporting umbrella for tracking and scheduling purposes. So there's a separate page here specifically for campaigns like you'd have for project that will have a few views here, so you can dig back into past campaigns if you'd like. This is my test site, so there's a lot in here for Acme Incorporated. They're a very good client for my test site, but today we're going to be looking at this Workamajig webinar campaign. I set this up in advance to the call here, so I'll take you through some of the screens that I did to actually do this, so you can kind of see what that looks like if you've not seen that before. But I'm largely going to lean on this particular campaign here. And let's go ahead and pop it open and take a look at the major components for a campaign. So when we start a campaign, this is going to be your dashboard page. So just like your projects, you have an area to store conversations, you have an area to store files, you have an area to track deliverables if you'd like to do it at the campaign level. Again, looking at a campaign, it's basically a step up from projects, right? If we're looking at the hierarchy of how we look at data from a reporting perspective, campaigns would be one of the highest levels of that. We'd have campaigns, then we'd have projects, those projects would have tasks, and so on and so forth. It kind of flows down. So if we're storing things here at the campaign level, know that it's at the campaign level, right? Won't necessarily be at the project level. And there's a lot of good reasons to do that. I would say among my client base, it's split. Some store things at the project level, others store at the campaign level. But one of the nice things about storing it here at the campaign level is you have a central repository. So I could have 5 or 50 projects in my campaign, but all of the things that I need at the top level are here. So I could have a folder structure for the various projects with the final art files, for example, or any documentation for the client. Same thing with deliverables. We could issue those through here. Again, that's up to you where you do them. A lot of clients prefer to do them at the project level. That's perfectly fine. But just know that at the campaign, you have a separate area to store this information where you can kind of have it centralized a little bit. Now, I want to go into largely these pieces here on the left-hand side, our setup and our production areas. The setup is obviously where we'll start in terms of just how do you open a campaign. Before we do that, I want to actually show the new campaign screen. So when you go to add a new campaign, there's nothing here that's really going to change the world, so to speak. This is a pretty easy entry screen. And note that you may not have GL company. This again is my test site. This is a way to track multiple different books of business within the same instance of Workamajig. But you will have to have a name for your campaign and also select a pre-existing client from the list of clients that you have. You'll also have an option to set a start and end date for the campaign when it's running. Unlike in projects, you actually don't have to fill in either of these two things. You can just define an open amorphous range, or you can just say, hey, it starts in April and it runs till it's done. That's all perfectly fine. And then additional fields here for description and objective. These are optional fields that you can use, obviously, to describe your campaign and set these specific objectives for that campaign. Now, like I mentioned earlier, when you're setting these up, there's a few kind of archetypes of campaigns that we see here that are fairly common. And the projects and segments area is really where we'd start to set that up. Now, there are campaigns where you may, like I described a little bit earlier, know all of the projects that are going to be part of a campaign before you start it. I had an agreement with a client to provide these various services. I'm going to go ahead and create a campaign to track all of those together. In those instances, you typically come into here in projects and segments first, and you'd set up what those projects would look like. So I made a few, looks like about 7 here for this particular campaign before I jumped on. But if you have a new campaign, this would be blank. And in here is where you could either add new projects. So the top option for projects basically just says, hey, these are the templates that I have in my system. And these are the projects that I'd like to add. This is really handy. And this is kind of why I started this call harping on templates, is that the template system makes this process a lot easier. And that really works for multiple different types of campaigns. The first campaign that I described, I know all of my projects. I'm going to go ahead and open a campaign that has all of those projects in them. And it works for other campaigns that are more retainer based or a little bit more open-ended, where, the client has X number of dollars and they basically request projects throughout the campaign lifecycle. This works the same way. The only difference is when you're adding the projects, really. If you know all of the projects at the beginning of the campaign, I would at least create them. And this is how you do that, right? I'd come in here, I'd hit that more button and click projects. And then from there, I'd select which template. So I could say, oh, I need a collateral project. I need well, I guess I have collateral. I need a brand ID project. I need a print ad. And then you could add these, and it will actually create all 3 of these projects at one time. Now, additionally to this, campaigns can have their own subgroupings within them called segments. That's these pieces right here. Well, this one has no segment. The other 2 I've labeled for Q2 and Q3. Again, these are pretty flexible. You can group these segments however you like. I've chosen a time period for them, but you may opt to say, hey, these are social projects, these are digital projects, these are brochure collateral projects or segments, whichever. But one way or another, segments give you an additional grouping for your campaigns when you're building them. That number one, just logically separate your projects. So you can say, oh, there's all my Q2 projects. Don't care about those right now. I'm working on these. And it also has an impact in reporting. When you set up a budget for your campaign, we will budget both at the campaign level. So overall, I have, let's say, $100,000 for this campaign. But in Q2, we have 40,000 of it, right? This kind of gives you that subgrouping, not just in dollars, also in hours that you can track. And the same thing when we look at the overall arc of the schedule for the campaign. So all these things will come into play. Segments are by no means required when you set up campaigns. They're just, again, an optional piece that you can use to add additional detail from a reporting perspective and a logical separation of the projects that are within the campaign. The other option you'll see here to link projects to campaign, this second option, when we click the More button up here, this looks for existing projects. So you may be in some scenarios where you've opened up some projects and you've realized later, as you've discussed with the client or just for whatever reason, that you want those projects linked to a campaign. This looks out for open projects in the system. And you can actually search by project number. It will, I don't know if I have 17, let's just do 00. So you have to put some search term in here. These are all of my projects that are not linked to a campaign. So I can come in here and say, oh, let's go ahead and backload these into a campaign. And from a reporting perspective, even if there's some tasks finished in those projects, even if there's some hours reported to them, that project will link to the campaign with that reporting detail still. So if I go to this budget screen, which we'll be doing here in a little bit, that project, even if it's already well loaded with hours and well under process, it will be part of the budget consideration when we're looking at that screen. I mentioned segments a little bit earlier. This is actually how you define those here in this More button area. This allows you to pop this open and say, okay, I'm going to add a segment. Through the process of doing that, if I added a Q4, for example, I could say, let's add Q4. And these are the projects I want to add to that particular segment. I can describe it as well and add a start and end date for the timeline for it. You could say, oh, these 3 projects, for example. These are templates that will be made into actual projects after I select them on the campaign. So from a setup perspective, that's obviously the first thing that we want to do. If we have the ability to map out all of the projects, I would definitely recommend doing that at the outset of your campaign. Don't want to forget anything. And also for budget considerations, if we have all of the projects built, we can typically just go ahead and do that and then create the budget directly afterwards. You'll see the estimates are the second set of our setup process here. So we set up our campaigns, we set up our project and we set up our campaign arc here. And typically at this part, before we even move on to the next step of the setup process for a campaign, we'd want to go through these projects and set them up, right? So it depends on when you want to deploy them and how your workflow works is a little bit flexible, right? But I've put several of these projects into production already. I may also come in here and set up my estimates at a project level. I'd like to speak to that a little bit here in a moment too, but just kind of some of those top level considerations of popping into each one of these projects. I can just click on these lines and begin the setup. So that's kind of how it's designed to work here. Now, once we've built this arc and we're happy with it, even if it's not all of the projects for the campaign, maybe there is a Q4 that's coming and I just don't know what's going to be in it just yet because the client doesn't know. That's fine. I've built out what I can here. I've entered in some of those estimates for these. When we're looking at budgeting for a campaign, there's a couple of ways to approach this. So remembering that a campaign itself has a separate budget from your projects. And we have 2 estimate types for campaigns, and they're meant to serve different needs depending on the type of campaign that you're working with. The first one basically just says all of my projects will have their individual budgets, right? I have a campaign budget. Again, let's just say it's $100,000. I don't know what this is going to work out to, but I have a campaign budget. But as part of that budget, the logo project eats, I don't know, 5,000 of that. I'm just throwing numbers out, right? And so at that point, I'd want to come in here and build that estimate to say, okay, this isn't my full campaign total. This one's $1,400, looks like, just shy of. This isn't my whole campaign, but this project as a part of the campaign, I can track independently. I can see if we've gone over on our logo project and under on something else, or something like that. That's kind of one approach to doing this, is to say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and build these. Now, as a note, you do not necessarily have to build campaign or estimates at both the campaign or project level. You definitely want one at the campaign level if you're asking me, so that you can track against, the total campaign budget. At the project level, it's for that more ancillary roll down detail for one aspect of it, just to say, okay, did we go over on any one of these specific projects? So just in the interest of having as much data as possible, you can build those estimates. You can also track these projects independently to make sure that as a whole, nothing's running so over that it's going to also threaten the campaign's budget, or things are balancing out. But you don't necessarily have to store them at both levels. You can just build a campaign level estimate, because that's basically where we're choosing to track this now from a reporting perspective. We're not looking at a single project, though we can. We're looking at a campaign as a collection of projects. So for this example, I have built estimates in all of these different projects so that we can roll them up. I did that partially to show you the two estimate types. So let's go there now. Once we're happy with our projects and segments, right, we built them, we've got a nice flow to this here, we can jump into the estimates part of the campaign. And this I've left for us to do together. So join me, it's going to be fun. So we can go ahead and build an estimate here. And I mentioned this process is actually very, very similar to what you see in projects. The new estimate screen is going to come out here. Your internal and external approvers will ask you for those. We'll also ask for delivery dates or approval due dates for notification purposes. But the big thing on the screen to me is the estimate type here. There are two estimate types in campaigns. One is by service only and one is by project only. And like I mentioned, these are really meant to service a specific need when you're building campaigns. By project only assumes that you build estimates at the project level. They need to be there. This is basically saying my campaign total budget should be a cumulative total of all of the approved estimates or the estimates I've chosen from the projects that are part of the campaign. I want to do this one first and then double back to service only. But for service only says that I don't necessarily know all of the projects that are in this campaign. But I do know the bottom line that we're going to charge the client, or the budget for the campaign. And so we can do that by allocating a certain number of hours to each service. This is very similar to what you see in projects. It just removes the task side, and I'll take you through that specifically here in a moment. But if we select by project only, let's start there. I'm going to go ahead and save this. Again, this is going to look very similar to your traditional estimates in Workamajig here. It's going to slide out a panel that shows us the total number of labor and expenses. Or in this instance, it's actually just going to show us the projects that are linked to it, provided that this actually comes out in a moment here. So we'll give it a second to pop out. So in this, when we're building by project only, there we go. Now it's come out here for us. It's going to show us just a total, right? Because our campaign says, hey, this is by project only. So I'm looking to the project budgets for the budget for the campaign. And just like in a project, you would click these numbers here to open up the panel that shows this. And this is going to show each project individually, along with the estimate and the total budget for that project. It's just going to keep adding those up. So 5,000 here, 10,000 here, so on and so forth. It will make a campaign budget for you. So again, this comes back to templates. The templates make this process a lot easier. If you've baked in the number of hours into your templates that it would typically take to perform these projects that are part of your campaign, you can effectively just have Workamajig one button press build an estimate for you. It says, hey, we already know what you bill hourly for your services. You've told us how long you need those services in these projects, so we can build you an estimate for that. And so that makes this process a lot easier, where I can come in here and say, okay, my budget for my logo project will be this approved estimate here. And so I can start to choose them, right? And this drop down is if you have multiple estimates. You may have several estimates in the same project, but typically you're either just saying all approved or selecting a specific estimate. So for these, I'm going to select all approved, and you'll notice as I do that, it's just increasing the total budget of my campaign as a whole. Each project has its own budget, and then the campaign gets fed all of that detail. Looks like we end up at about just shy of 50,000 for this particular campaign. So obviously this is a little bit more inflexible from a budget creation standpoint. It serves really well in those campaigns that you know everything at the start of, right? You know all of the projects that are coming into it. This still can be adjusted at a campaign level. You can still create change orders like you can at the project level. So if you need to add a few projects to your campaign, no problem, issue a change order estimate and then add those projects in, and it will increase your budget for you. But at the end of the day, you're not really manipulating the budget from the campaign level. This is really just reflecting the total that we get from projects. So there's really not much I can do here to say, oh, I'd rather this be 16,000. I'd actually have to go back to the project to change the budget at that level here to have the information feed into the campaign and notify us that way here. So for this one, it's basically done, right? It's pulled all of the labor and expenses from those projects that I've set here. Once I approve in a campaign, just like in a project, that becomes my budget. So this campaign will now have a budget of $48,000. Know that we have the total hours in here. We don't, but we'll see that on the budget screen here. So it has this $48,000. Now I'm not going to approve two estimates for this particular projects, but for this particular campaign, pardon. But I do want to show at least what the service only side of this looks like, because if you'd like to set the budget for a campaign at its inception, you can use this estimate type to do that. So this again says, maybe I don't know all the projects that are going to be part of this campaign, or maybe I know some, but not all, and I'd still like to set the scope of work budget in my campaign. These are just scenarios I'm picking up, but they're pretty common scenarios for clients that use these here in the system. So for the estimate type by service only, when I save this and I open up the next page here, this is a little bit closer to what you'd see in projects, with the major difference being here in the labor side. Right, when I jump into labor, instead of showing each and every individual project, all we're going to see is segments if you have them, and the number of hours and total labor gross that you want in those segments. So I can come in here and say, oh, we're going to need about 10 hours of account management. We'll need, 15 hours of copywriting. We need 30 hours of digital, and you'll start to see those labor totals add up here. Now, if you don't have segments, basically the services that you're choosing is just for the entire campaign. We don't really care which segment's part of. But again, segments give you that granular breakout in your budget screen when you're looking at this. I'm going to set up at least something here. Let's add 50 hours of social and something like that, just to get some numbers up in here. And then for this one, we'll say 50 hours of videography and some editing. Something like that. So I'm not going to approve this right out the gates, but that's basically what we're doing here, right? We're setting the hours to get our gross here, and we're budgeting both the number of hours and the labor side of this, but we're not necessarily coupling this to any specific project. And that's something meaningful to mention from a reporting aspect. If you're building estimates by service only, we don't know at the campaign level how you want that budget spread among projects, right? It's just saying, hey, I have a bottom line figure here, this $19,000 that I'm going to track the actuals against from all of the projects that come in. So when we're looking at a budget screen, it will let you know, hey, you've got X number of actuals in this project, but you won't necessarily see a project budget from a campaign side at that level unless you don't want. I had a question here in chat. Amy asks if you can do this in reverse, such as add your campaign budget first and then have the project estimates subtract from the campaign budget. They effectively kind of do, Amy. I mean, basically, when you're looking at it in the budget screen for campaigns, and we will go there in a moment, you'll see the total campaign budget, and then you'll see the cumulative total of all of the projects that have been added to it as well. So you can kind of compare those two fields to each other. Okay, so we've looked at the two different estimate types. We've looked at our by project only and our by service only. Those are the two different types there. They're typically used for different types of campaigns when you're opening them here. Again, the approved estimate does become your budget afterwards here, so make sure it goes through that process. I made this really easy for myself. I'm the approver on everything in here in my test site, but obviously you may have a different arc for that, and that's perfectly fine. You can also send these to the client if you'd like with whatever level of detail that you'd like. But those are obviously two big pieces in the start of setting up a campaign. From here, we have our campaign settings and our team tab. I'm not going to spend too much time in campaign settings because a lot of this is pretty self-explanatory, but there are a few things in here that are pretty big in terms of how you build a campaign that I want to speak to. And so let's take a look at that here. Now, if your campaigns come from an opportunity, that will obviously be seen here. If you need to adjust your start or due dates, if you want to change or add a description, things like that, you can do that all from this particular page here. But one of the things I really want to call out on this page are the bill by option, and then the things that follow beneath it here. The options here are bill by project or campaign, and so that's basically telling Workamajig either A, I want to bill all of the projects that are part of this campaign. I can still bill them on the same invoice, but I'm billing the projects, right? That's just how I'd like to do this, to take those actuals or take those budgets from the projects and bill them that way. The other side of saying bill by campaign tells Workamajig I'm actually going to bill the campaign as a campaign. So if I'm billing fixed fee and my budget's $50,000, then that's what I'm billing, right? Regardless of what the project budgets or actuals are, we're billing the campaign here. So this would typically be used for fixed fee billing, not necessarily for time and materials. And you can tell Workamajig to use the campaign budget or to use the project budgets that are part of a campaign. That's what this option is here. And you'll notice once we opt to use the campaign budget, we can also set a billing schedule. If you do that in your projects currently, that's also an option here at campaigns or in campaigns, but it will only be visible if you've told Workamajig you're billing by campaign and using the campaign budget specifically. Then we can set the schedule here. Once you set a campaign to bill by campaign, that's actually what makes the option to bill show up here. This option is hidden, and if you've told us you're billing at the project level, because you don't need it. We're not billing at the campaign level in that instance. So if you do ad hoc billing, this is actually a way to do that directly out of the campaign, and that's directly from the settings on that campaign here. Now, for the team tab, this is a way to track the members that are part of the teams of the projects that are on this campaign. And we recently added the ability at the campaign team level to auto-assign from the campaign level. This is really handy. So if you're building 6 projects at once, instead of having to assign each one individually and setting the teams for them, if they're the same people, let's say you have a client team or something like that, I could come in here and say, oh, okay, you know what? I'm going to assign my admin to this here. Gosh, I wish I gave people some more unique names here, but I'm assigning these 2 people. And just like at a project level, I could say, oh, okay, my account manager, well, they do account management. My admin, well, today they're going to work in editing. So you can apply these the same way you can at a project level. The auto assign here at a campaign level will auto assign to any unassigned service for editing on any of the projects that are part of this. For the team, if you don't see the team option, it's likely a security piece where you're not allowed to see the team of a project for some reason. That would apply to campaigns. If you can see my projects at campaign levels, that's a little unusual. We may want to take a look at that. You can shoot us an email and we can take a look at your specific setup if you'd like. Okay, but you can make these assignments. Now, this is obviously works best if it is the same people across all of the projects, or at least one person. It might be one account manager, for example, and you go, okay, well, I'm going to save myself a bunch of time and just say, hey, Sally's my account manager for all of these campaign projects. And then you can just add the one person and auto assign here. Yeah, but it works the same way as it does at a project level. It just works across multiple projects instead of one, any project that's part of this campaign. So team is by no means a requirement at a campaign level like it is at a project level. You absolutely want to set your team at a project level, but this is part of the process that can be made a little bit more efficient for you by using this tab. So don't feel bad if you go, that doesn't sound like something we would need. That's fine. We've just built it as a tool for those that might.
So that's really the setup for your campaign. There's a few considerations we'd want to take in regards to the projects that are part of this in terms of, hey, when do we start these? But again, the campaign kind of gives you a nice big overview to be able to do that. Maybe just like we have here, I'm starting all of these projects, but there's a few that I'm leaving in a, pre-production or waiting phase or something like that. And I've done that here. And again, I can just click into any one of these projects by clicking onto the list here. It will open up the panel for us to be able to make those changes if needed. So now we have a campaign. We've got a campaign with some segments and some projects. It's got a budget. It's actually got 2 estimates, but we're only using one of them. And it's kind of set up the way that we want here. So, that's really the setup side for your campaigns. What are the things we want to take a look at and think about when we're opening a campaign? How do we do those things? From a tracking perspective, that's when we start entering this area here. We jump into the production side of your campaign. Some of these I'm going to speak to a little bit of an overview, like specs. You can have campaign level spec sheets. Again, you can still have them at the project level. It's really a question of where you want to store them. Do you want them on the individual projects? Do you want them on the campaign? Do you want both? You can do that, right? So this is the same as adding specs at project level. It's just where we're keeping it that's different when we see it on a campaign. And that's the same thing with files. And this I want to speak to a little bit more because I think it can be pretty useful. But just like on the project level, we can define files or folders within a campaign. This is kind of a central repository. This is especially useful if you have a large number of projects in your campaign. And tracking and finding those pieces can be a little bit more difficult. You can define folders within here to store that information, or just upload files. Maybe all of your final art files make it here. That's fairly common from what I see for clients. They'll store most of the working files in the projects. They may even do the deliverables there. I'd say that's more common than not. But at the end of the day, it is nice to also be able to say, okay, let's store those here. Let's have all of the final art for these various projects in this area here. But works the same as it does in projects, just a separate area for you to be able to store it at a campaign level. Where we start to get into the pieces that are a little bit more special for a campaign is when we get into the budget, bill, schedule, and transactions page. The budget page here in a campaign is a little bit more complex than what you'd see at a project level, because we're looking at multiple tiers of data here. And this is something I like to introduce when I'm talking about this screen, if I'm training it individually with a client here. One of the things I like to speak to on this is the multiple levels of layers in the reporting. Now, you kind of see it at projects when you're looking at a project budget and it breaks it out by task or by item. There's basically a subgrouping within the report that we're looking at, right? I see the projects, and then I see the tasks, the gross and the number of hours that were budgeted for each of them, and then I can run that comparison. It's basically the same idea here. But we have multiple tiers. Now, for this one, we're starting at a campaign level, right? Here's the campaign budget. If we look over here, it says, hey, you have to bill all of this because we told the system we're billing as a campaign. Nothing's been billed. If I scroll over here, we see our budgeted hours. We can see from the project in the campaign perspective. We can also see, I didn't include my admin hours in my campaign. That's why we have a difference here. We can also see the actuals, the allocated, things like that. There's a lot of different fields that you can add into this field, into this reporting area here. But again, we're looking at multiple different levels. And so keep that in mind when you're both choosing fields. All of our fields are labeled for the level of detail that they're at. So campaign is obviously above projects, right? If that's here, all of these fields are labeled campaign. If I scroll over, we'll see a bunch of them labeled as project. I typically actually like to keep these separated, campaigns on the left, projects on the right. That's, again, up to you how you want to do that. To me, it just reads a little bit easier. And I would typically stack things like project actual hours right next to project budget hours, which I have not done in this one. I rearranged this and I guess I left it kind of a mess. But the point is, this is adjustable, and you are looking at multiple different levels of detail in here when you're looking at a campaign budget. So it starts with the campaign. If I open this, let's go ahead and collapse these here. The next level it will go to are your segments. Okay, so as a segment whole, again, same idea here. It's going to show us the total number of hours in a segment, the total amount to bill for a segment, the total, actual hours, budget hours. You'll see those are split out here in the segments. And then finally, we get down to the projects themselves. I pop open one of my segments, shows the same detail, but it's showing it at a project level, right? 36 hours here, 59 hours here, and so on and so forth. Okay, I'm going to continue on this, but I do have a couple of questions here. So let me take this look here. Maggie says that you're getting different sidebar options in your campaign view. You're not seeing the team or custom fields or production. Those, again, may be security concerns regarding how your security group is set up in your local site. The transactions and for production might be a little bit different, but some of them may be depending on how you're set up. So you may want to send an email to us here so we can take a look at your security settings and let you know what you'd need for these. Typically, they should mirror pretty close to what you see in projects, right? So if you can see transactions in projects, you should also see them in campaigns. If you can see the team in projects, you should also be able to see them in campaigns. Oh, you know what? I wonder if that is an enhancement for the team. I'll take a look at the team for you guys. We'll circle back around to that one here. That was an enhancement we did several months back, but it might be something I have to enable. Okay, yeah, Maggie, you should see it then. It's almost certainly a customization we just have to turn on for you then, or a lab. I'll take a look. I'll try to see that before the end of the call and let you know. All right, and Sarah said you had the same problem. Okay, yeah, it's probably a customization. Sorry, I forgot what I had turned on in here in my test site. So sorry for leading you guys astray, but obviously this is a function in the system. We can go ahead and kick that on for you if you need. Now, with the campaign budget here, similar to projects, these do have drill down. So anything you see underlined in a campaign means that you can delve further into the details of what's been entered here, and to see a breakout for them. I should have some actual hours in here. I don't know why I'm not seeing it, but yeah, so we can look at any of these, right? I can look at the segment amounts billed. I could look at the actuals, the any of those, anything that's underlined that has this little hand on it. We'll pull this open and say, hey, here are the invoices applied to Q3, or here are the invoices applied to the campaign. We'll basically show you all of those, and it will also do that typically with some of the budget pieces. Now, one thing I'd like to note about this here, if you've never used campaigns in Workamajig, our default set for campaign budget fields is pretty limited, but you can change those. It's limited by the default. There's a ton of options when we look in the settings here. So if you hit more and then campaign budget settings, it'll open up this panel on the right-hand side, and these are your columns. You can go ahead and edit those here on the right-hand side. And again, we've separated these by campaign and project, so you know what level of detail that you're looking at when you're looking at the reporting. There is a lot here, quite a bit. I actually wish this was searchable. Right now, what I typically do is just Control F, or I think Command F if you're on a Mac. If I'm looking for budget, for example, I could type that in and it would highlight all of those. There's a lot of options here, so I might want to get more specific with it. But for now, that this is how this works. It is a hope and an effort of mine to make this searchable because of how many fields there are. But for now, this is probably the best way to go, right? Just use the budget, or excuse me, use your search function in your browser, and let it highlight those for you, and find them. And once you've defined the fields that you like, you can also set the display order for them. These can be clicked and dragged around. So for example, if I did want my project actual hours next to my project current budget hours, I could do that right here. And to me, that makes more sense, right? And I'm going to move my campaign pieces up here. Let's go ahead and fix this now that we're on here. So now when I save this, I have a nice flow, right? I haven't changed any of my fields, but all my campaign pieces are on the left. All of my project pieces are on the right, and the relevant fields are stacked next to each other. Here's my budget. Here's my actuals. Looks like we're still in good shape here, right? So for the budget, I would definitely recommend customizing it here, at least add a few fields that are relevant to what you're looking for. You can get extremely detailed, like what did we budget for specifically for outside expense pieces, or what did we budget for labor lines? What are the actuals for those? Every budget piece will typically have the yin to its yang by having the actuals that you can stack next to each other. But one way or another, you can come in here and adjust your campaign budget settings through the More button. Additionally, just like in projects, you may not use these, but we have the option to define column sets. I actually really like doing this because let's just go ahead and set it as a test. This allows you, first of all, to have different column sets in your campaigns for different people. So different people may have different views that they want to see, maybe different layouts. Maybe they're like me, where they're like everything's left here and right there. That's fine. You can define those through here. And one of the things I like about using the column sets is these are searchable. So when I come in here and I say, hey, you know what, I want the budget expense gross, I could type in expense gross, and it would give me all of the matching fields, and I could say, this is the one I want. So if you're looking to put it together and the other edit screen is a little frustrating for you, this is actually a really great way to go. And this also allows you to have multiple different column sets. So I could say I have a test one here, and then I have another column set. Put that here. And what that does is when I go back to the previous page, now I have a drop down where I can look at the different column sets that have been defined. These can be security gated too. So if you want one that's just yours and you don't want to share it, I respect that. And you can limit that from a security standpoint when you're putting them together in this area here. So yeah, a couple of different pieces there on the budget. We're probably going to skip ahead here now to looking at billing and the schedule pieces, but any questions on the budgets here, campaign budgets, before we move on? Okay, let's go ahead and move on then. So obviously the budget screen is something you'll want to be keeping an eye on throughout the life cycle of your campaign. On the previous page, if we take a step back from the campaign itself, you can actually add your budget detail here too. This screen is adjustable if you go into the system settings, or no, display options doesn't allow you to do that. But in the system settings, you can jump into here to edit columns. This is very similar to what you do in the campaign budgets. But again, if I have multiple campaigns running, this is a way I could put in what's my campaign current total budget, what's my budget hours, and then what are the actuals associated with those. Now I want to circle back around to billing. This isn't really a billing call, so I'm not going to go too far down this particular road. But I want to hit the schedule here first. Now, since I have a campaign with, I believe there's 7 projects on this particular campaign, I did set start and end dates for them as well, which is something you'll obviously want to do. And that information will feed into your schedule. And this is, to me, another one of the great reasons to have a campaign. Aside from your budget, that's obviously a huge part of it, and just logically grouping your projects together. Being able to see the timing of all of your different initiatives related to the same client or the same scope of work can be really helpful. So if I jump into the campaign here or the schedule here at a campaign level, it's again showing all of the different pieces that are associated with this. And if you've ever used the traffic calendar screen, this is actually pretty similar to that, although with different intentions. Again, it starts with the campaign. There we go. I don't know where I pluralized this, but I did. When I expand that here, the next step is segments, right? So it's saying, hey, here is your schedule in these different segment pieces. I guess I don't have much for these. And when I expand these, it will start to show the timelines for the tasks that are part of these projects. We can go to any level of detail, right? So Q2, here's my project, and then here are the tasks that are in that project, along with some of their summary and subtasks. So when we're looking at this, collapsing information on this side obviously also affects the Gantt here. This Gantt can be moved in or out. So if you like a larger Gantt, that's perfectly fine. We can accommodate that. So we can kind of look through each one of these here, and we can also set up the column sets in here. So I actually think I do have the defaults in here right now. I haven't made any additional column sets. But again, I can add pieces to this, like what are the actual hours, who's assigned to these, and for how many hours. It will show you the initials for users, the plan start complete, the percentage complete. Those all can be detailed here either by adjusting your column sets here. Oh, I guess we don't have a standard one, so it would have to be with column sets. And I'm going to call this one test. And again, it's the same idea as what we saw previously on the budget screens. I could come in here, insert rows. This will show you all of the options. And again, this is searchable. So if I do want my actual hours in here, if I could spell it correctly, that would be nice. There we go. I can go ahead and add that to this column set, and it will add it for us. Now, I think I'm going to have to close and reopen it to have it refresh the detail, or I guess I didn't save one of those two things. Oh, go to it. There we go. There's my actual hours. So showing my 21 actual hours here in this campaign. I did charge some time to this here. Again, showing some of the tasks that are completed, the total timeline for them. And any one of the tasks or projects that you see in the schedule can be opened from the screen here too. So if I click on the project itself, it will open up the project dashboard, or I can go more detailed and say, oh, I want to see this concept development task in particular. You can actually manage your assignments from here. So I could say, oh, you know what, I do need to assign someone to this. Let's put Candace to work. Let's give her a couple of hours and save. I can adjust my plan start and complete dates. And for anyone that's been in Workamajig for quite some years, this screen might look familiar as our old project schedule task editing screen. If not, everything is basically the same from a terminology standpoint. What's my duration? What's my plan start and complete? It's just laid out in a little bit of a different way here. And I'm going to mention this, although I'm not going to show too far in here, but at the campaign level, you do have the ability to also set project level predecessors. So you can say that an entire project doesn't start until a previous project is completed, or a task on a previous project is completed. So you can say this project starts in the middle of another project's lifecycle or something like that. This is not necessarily something you have to use. Obviously, you can have your predecessor set up the same way, but from a campaign perspective, you'll see that once I enable the option to do this, we'll see the project number here first, and then the task number that it should be waiting for afterwards. So it just adds an extra field here. So you can basically say, oh, for my logo project here, excuse me, once we finish client final approval, maybe that's what triggers my project setup task in this PR project here, right? So I could come in here, do that same thing and say, oh, you know what, the predecessor for this, we're going to go ahead and set it to that 013 project there, and we're going to set it to the last task on that project. And so when we're looking at the predecessor for it, and sorry, I'm going to click around for just a second, you'll see these cross-project predecessors within when they're represented like this. We always show them like this. We show the project number first and then the task line that it's waiting for afterwards. You can definitely get yourself into some trouble for this here if you make circular references and things like that. So I always try to train users to do this in a way just like this, right? This project ends on this task. Once it's marked as complete, then we start this one. That kind of straightforward piece there. If you start having them go spaghetti back and forth, it can be really difficult to start tracking these things. But I at least wanted to let you know that that was an option. That is something that has to be turned on. You won't see it by default. It's a transaction preference in campaigns. But once you do, you'll see the ability to set a project as part of the predecessor, right? This project has a task that waits for a task in this project to finish before it starts. So pretty nifty. A few other things you can do on the screen here. You can hide your completed tasks. That becomes very handy when you start getting well into your campaign's life cycle. You know, you just basically hide those out and just look at what's active in here. I had a question here if we could add allocated hours to the schedule. You absolutely can. You can add allocated actual or budgeted hours. I just kept it pretty clean, right? but you can add all of those different pieces. They're options. This is actually very similar to what you'd see in a project schedule grid. You can add the same detail. Yeah, so aside from that, from the campaign, the schedule screen, this, you know, gives you the ability to change these. I mentioned you can click into the projects or the tasks to adjust them. That all becomes pretty handy. So this screen is, you know, again, a really great way to say, okay, all these projects are related to each other. I need to see a screen where I can manage them all. And this really gets back to the why, right? These, to me, the schedule and budget screens are the whys for why you would build a campaign. We can put all this stuff together in one place. We can track it together. I don't have to go to 9 different projects and make sure that they're all healthy. I can start at the campaign and then trickle down into the projects if I need to. Now, I mentioned the transactions here. This is actually not hugely different than what you'd see at a project level. It just says, again, we're linking all these projects together, so all of the transactions should be visible here in one place. Here they are. Right. The major difference for this is that we group it by project number to start with, at least by default, but this is modifiable. So if you want to change this and you're familiar and comfortable with changing reports in Workamajig, you can click in here to modify to change what groups or columns are displayed in the report here. But at the end of the day, this just says, hey, here's everything that's been charged to projects that are part of this campaign, and we'll go ahead and group them together by project and type for you. Stacy wants to see how we hid completed tasks, excuse me. So if I jump back into my schedule here, it's this option right here, just above the schedule detail. Okay. So now I mentioned billing. Now for billing for campaigns, this is definitely something I would refer to you for other webinars. I believe we've done one on specifically campaign billing, but if we haven't, the standard billing calls should also cover how you bill a campaign. The bill option, again, will only show if you jump into your campaign settings and tell Workamajig I'm billing by campaign. That just tells us, hey, we're going to bill the campaign specifically. This does have impact and things like billing worksheets if you use those as well. We'll basically package the campaign as a campaign when we're presenting you the worksheet options, or we'll show you the individual projects that are a part of it. Either one of those two different things. So once you set it to bill by campaign, that's what gives you this bill option here. Again, this is pretty similar to what you would see in projects, and this would be an ad hoc billing if you're clicking into here. So you can either see the existing invoices that were created at a campaign level. It will not filter the project level, but billings up to this level here. And you can bill by one amount, a percentage of segment, or a percentage of project if you are billing fixed fee, right? And these would be your options. Or if you're advanced billing, if you advance bill and place the funds in the accrual account, that's what this would do here for you. But I just like to take a note of that because there's two considerations when we're building campaigns, right? One is the project management side. I'm biased, so I think that that's a very important part of it here. But obviously, at a certain point, we want the client to pay us here. So asking, telling the system kind of where and how that will be done is in that campaign settings area there. Aside from the campaign itself, there are a few other things I want to show from a consideration standpoint. You can adjust the detail that's in here. There is a description field that we can pull out here. I don't know why I've hidden mine, but it did. So you can adjust the settings to pull those various different pieces out here. And to show them, I don't have a campaign description, so it's not showing here. There's also a burn chart that you can make visible in here. I don't know that I'm going to be able to show you much from that just yet, but that can be made visible in the list here as well. That will show up as a burn chart here. This works very similar to what it does in projects. Again, I don't know if we've gone over this previously in other webinars, but it will essentially give you a burn chart at the campaign or the campaign level where you can view that detail underneath those settings there. And then I mentioned a few other reporting considerations. If you've never used campaigns before, again, just know that when we're looking at reports, campaigns are a higher level reporting grouping than what projects would be, kind of a step above the fray a bit. So when you build reports looking at campaigns, that's definitely a consideration that you want to take, and considering kind of where you're storing the data is kind of important on that. So the easiest way to view these is probably in views for campaigns here. This will just give you one line per campaign in a report that you can use to pull these out. We have 3 defaults. They are these ones right here that we're looking at. But also know that you do have a custom campaign data set in your report center. And when you build project views, so if I come into here and I look at my projects page and I jump into the views, one of the things that we can do in the projects view is to pull out campaign fields as here as well. So I can say, you know what, I want to group by campaign. We'll just say the campaign name. Now, since we're looking at one line per project here, right? If I have a few campaigns, those are set up here. Everything else that's not part of a campaign ends up in this empty caret here, right? So this is kind of what I was speaking to. If you wanted to build a project level report here with just that looks at your campaigns, you can group by them. You can pull campaign fields into these. Oftentimes, what I like to do is to actually build a projects report that's campaigns only. So what I'll do for that is just say, oh, campaign name is not blank, but not blank. If I do that, that basically says, okay, I only want to see projects that are part of a campaign in this particular report. And so I can just eliminate all of those that are loose and separate from it. Okay, just kind of wanted to give that overview here for campaigns. If you're new to these here, again, and you're asking yourself, is this something I want to use, or how can we apply this? It's just, again, a way to group together a number of different projects underneath the same umbrella. So you don't have to build like these super projects that have all of these different summary tasks in them. It allows you to budget them separately and differently. It allows you to manage the schedule in one place here. I hope this was helpful here. If you guys have any questions, we do have a few minutes left here, so I'll be popping through these here. Looks like I have a couple queued, so I'll go ahead and answer those. But if you have any questions, please feel free to throw them into chat, and I'll try to figure out how we turn that team tab on for you guys here in a second too. Maggie asks if there's any change to the burn chart in the queue. You don't find it very useful, but it can be helpful with some adjustments. I don't know specifically if we are. That doesn't mean we aren't. But I just don't know for sure. If you have suggestions on that, I would definitely encourage you to send them into the system. We definitely value client feedback very highly when we make changes to our modules, and a lot of the changes that you've seen in the system, including some of the ones I showed here in campaigns today, came from client feedback, like that team tab. The schedule page is, to me, vastly improved from where it was a couple of years ago based off of feedback that the clients brought to us. So please reach out to us at support@workamajig.com. We'll send that over to our development team and talk to speak about potentially getting into the system as an enhancement. Okay, any other questions? Let's see if it's a lab. Text editor, nope, none of those. Okay, yeah, so I think the team tab might be a customization here. I'll have to take a look at it. If you'd like, you can email us about that too. We can see about potentially getting that turned on for you here. Outside of that, if you have any questions or if you want something that's a little bit more tailored to your workflow, I tried to keep this pretty open-ended because obviously there's a lot of different use cases for campaigns here in the system. But if you'd like to follow up with your account manager, either if you want to just shoot them an email, if you have any questions, you can do that at support@workamajig.com. If you want to schedule a training, you can reach out to training@workamajig.com as well. So if you'd like to follow this up and say, hey, these look like they might be useful for us, let's go through, what it would look like for our team specifically, I would definitely encourage you to do that. So I got another question here from Stacy asking how I grouped the campaign on the projects page. Yeah, I did that a little bit quickly, Stacy, sorry. So when we go into any project view here, so I'm going to just pull into active projects again here. When we go into any project view, when you modify, the first option is for your groupings, right? So I can come in here and say, oh, I want to group by the campaign name or campaign ID, either one of the two works. But once you select that, that creates the grouping for you. And if you want to report like I did just a moment ago, that's only campaign projects, I would probably not use your active projects report for this. I would copy this first, which you can do in that modify area as well. But once you do, once you modify, sorry, didn't mean to close that. If you want to filter those projects out, what I did was I said, okay, campaign name is not blank. That's my condition. And I didn't do a prompt for this. I just said, hey, not blank, just run that, right? So just auto filter out any of these projects here that don't apply to the campaign. That will hide those out for you. Okay, everyone. Well, it looks like we have about 2 to 3 minutes to, do yoga or grab a cup of coffee here. So I hope you all got a lot out of this webinar here. Thanks for coming. And I hope you guys have a great day. If you need anything here, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're at support@workamajig.com. So you guys have a good one.